Hello everyone, today we'll be discussing about reactive oxygen species. It is remarkable irony of modern medicine that the very molecule which underpins all the aerobic life is one of the drugs that we are prescribed with the least amount of rigor. In almost every clinical scenario we have studied, our instinct to target higher oxygen levels has resulted in more harm than good. We throw this word reactive oxygen species constantly, but we rarely read about the actual mechanisms. I myself have been guilty of this. When I was reading about this, I realized that I know a lot less than what I thought I knew about reactive oxygen species. And this is why I made this 3-part series where we'll deep dive into these molecules and discuss new research and mechanisms which can help us understand oxygen therapy better. About 150 years ago, Dr. Haldane started using oxygen as a therapy, and the first case reported on this oxygen use was in 1987 by Dr. Hochberg. In 1950s, Rebecca Gersman and Denham Harman published some seminal work proposing that oxygen poisoning and X-ray radiation shared a common mechanism, the production of free radicals. It was a brilliant insight at this time, but it inadvertently birthed a dogma that still persists. For decades since then, we physicians have been taught how to view reactive oxygen species as this chaotic unidirectional fire, a byproduct of metabolism that causes harm and simply needs to be extinguished. But it's time to change that outlook. So let's see what we are usually taught about reactive oxygen species. There are 3 molecules that constitute ROS: superoxide radical, hydrogen peroxide, and hydroxyl radical. The superoxide and hydroxyl radicals are charged ions, so they cannot move across the membrane and are stuck where they're produced. Hydroxyl radical is the most troublesome and it's extremely toxic. It indiscriminately oxidizes nearby DNA, lipids, and proteins. Hydrogen peroxide is neutral, so it can diffuse easily across the biological membranes. The way to think about reactive oxygen species is the superoxide is the initiator. This is the first ROS that's formed, and it gets converted to hydrogen peroxide, which is the messenger. And finally, the hydroxyl radicals are the damager. Mitochondria is the main site of production of reactive oxygen species. This is where cytochromes pump protons and transfer electrons. Some of these electrons, about 1 to 2%, leak into mitochondrial matrix and inner mitochondrial membranes. Molecular oxygen accepts that first single electron and forms the superoxide radical. Since this is a charged ion, it cannot cross lipid membrane and is stuck where it's made. Cytochrome 1 leaks electron into mitochondrial matrix, and cytochrome 3 can leak electron both between the membrane and in the mitochondrial matrix. So there is a persistent basal level of superoxide in the mitochondria. This is converted to hydrogen peroxide by superoxide dismutase, which is present both in the mitochondrial matrix and intermitochondrial membrane. Hydrogen peroxide, being an uncharged molecule, is able to cross cellular membranes. This gets converted to hydroxyl and nitroxyl radicals, which are the most damaging of all reactive oxygen species. There are 3 main types of main damages from reactive oxygen species: DNA base oxidation, lipid peroxidation, and protein carbonylation and folding errors. Lipid peroxidation is possibly the most important in acute illness. Hydroxyl radicals oxidize polyunsaturated fatty acid to form toxic lipid peroxide and cause early termination, resulting in aldehyde formation. Aldehydes alter membrane fluidity and permeability and even loss of integrity, resulting in cellular collapse. More toxic among them is malonaldehyde and 4-hydroxynenal, which covalently bonds to amino acids and cause protein inactivation. In mitochondria, peroxidation of cardiolipin releases cytochrome C into cytosol, resulting in triggering of apoptosis. In the lungs, they cause direct damage to the surfactants. ROS also cause protein oxidation and modification. 2 main pathways of injury are oxidation of disulfide bridges, forming sulfonic and sulfonic acid, and oxidation of your amino acid, forming dityrosine crosslinks. These changes permanently destroy the catalytic activity of critical cellular enzymes, and there is a vast number of them. ROS also oxidizes guanine into 8-oxoguanine, which looks like thymine structurally. And DNA polymerase therefore pairs it with adenine instead of cytosine, and this results in mutation and can drive carcinogenesis. Mitochondria is the primary victim of the reactive oxygen species, as your superoxide radical and hydroxyl radicals are unable to cross the membrane and stay put. These results in mitochondrial DNA damage, mitochondrial protein oxidation, and loss of integrity of mitochondrial membranes. This results in decreased ATP production, and this can lead to activation of your caspase cascade, leading to apoptosis. One of the most well-characterized examples of ROS biology is ischemia-reperfusion injury. After a prolonged period of hypoxia, cells are abruptly exposed to oxygen, generating bursts of ROS that overwhelms antioxidant defenses. This leads to extensive lipid peroxidation, disrupting the cellular membranes and driving most of the acute injury that you see in the ICU. Now, this excess ROS is called oxidative stress. When this worsens, we call oxidative distress. So how do we know that cells are in oxidative stress? Again, there is no test for it, but researchers have observed that when the peroxide levels exceed 100 nanomolar concentration, the cells start showing signs of oxidative stress. Another source which I was reading was discussing the cellular glutathione reserves. Ratio of reduced glutathione to its oxidized form is often used as a marker of body's overall redox status, and the normal cellular ratios are usually greater than 30. So what happens when the cells develop oxidative distress? Once the cells are in oxidative distress, all the ill effect that we discussed comes into play. There's a loss of compartmentalization and systemic changes, and this is the primary driver of several disease states such as atherosclerosis, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, etc. If the oxidative distress persists, this creates a self-sustaining vicious cycle of mitochondrial collapse. There is a point of no return where the opening of the MPTP dissipates proton gradient and ADP synthesis stops. MPTP is a mitochondrial permeability transition pore which dissipates the transmembrane proton gradient, and this halts ATP synthesis. Caspase cascade is then activated, resulting in either controlled cell death like apoptosis or a violent unregulated cell death which can cause further collapse of surrounding cells. And this is what is really occurring in late stages of shock. Understanding the pathways help you initiate more optimal treatment for the cycle rather than focusing on macrohemodynamic parameters or non-specific antioxidants. Breaking the cycle is likely the key to the survival. So this sounds all very scary, and hence it is natural to assume that giving antioxidants will help the toxic damage produced by the ROS in your patients. But this begs the question, how useful are they? Antioxidants have been studied for the past 30 years and have been proven time and again that these don't help your patients. There are multiple randomized controlled trials performed with almost every antioxidant in the ICU, and every one of them have failed to show any benefit. The question is why? What are we missing? Is our understanding of ROS still incomplete? Do ROS serve some other useful purpose? We'll discuss these in our next lecture. For now, let me give you some thoughts about why this may not work. First, we still don't know at what level of cellular redox state do the beneficial effect of the antioxidant occur. And since the cellular composition of body is diverse and some tissue is more metabolic than others, the redox state varies from cell to cell. There's a lot of heterogeneity. And these antioxidants do not have any specificity. They're everywhere, even in the tissues that have low redox state and those with high redox state, and they indiscriminately take the ROS down. Second, we ignore the fact that mitochondria are double membrane bound fortresses. Traditional antioxidants distribute themselves throughout the cytoplasm, but they rarely reach the high pressure environment of the inner mitochondrial membrane, where the leak is actually occurring. Lastly, the question is it chicken or the egg? Is the reactive oxygen species the problem, or the pathology that creates the mitochondrial dysfunction, like sepsis, is the problem? Should we reduce the ROS production by treating mitochondria and the disease, or should we treat the ROS once they are formed? Most of the researchers in this area don't really care about rigor of methodologies, and there are multiple number of studies which use unproven surrogates as a marker of benefits. Notice how these studies examine non-clinical outcomes, and mostly these are some lab values getting better. The critical question here to ask yourself is whether These lab values are of any value in determining the final outcome in your patient. So instead of performing more thoughtful studies, the common reaction is give high dose of antioxidants. So is it over for the antioxidants? Not really. We are beginning to understand the biochemical pathways and mechanisms. Newer targeted therapies are emerging where we can manipulate various components of electron transport chain and other enzymes to manage specific situations like ischemia, reperfusion injury. We'll discuss these emerging therapies in upcoming lectures. But for that, we have to understand the other side of reactive oxygen species, which we'll talk about in the next lecture. One of the books all medical professionals should read is this book by Nick Lane called Oxygen, the Molecule That Made the World. It's a very thought-provoking book. Hope this was helpful. Thank you.